To say that the paradigm shift of first-person shooter design philosophies in the late 90s and the early aughts was snappy would be underselling how fast it happened. One moment a player is watching mechanical marvels maintain top-secret research facilities on a train ride, jumping from platform to pipe to avoid canals of acid, and the next moment you're dug in a foxhole taking pot shots at enemy soldiers as your screen splashes red jelly, signaling you to slow it down and recoup your losses with no extra resources. Games like Halo and Call of Duty are important for the development of future console FPSs, but it wouldn't be until their respective second installments that their mechanical innovations wouldn't just affect the console market, but the mainstream itself. Keycard hunts and 9-button weapon inventories were already on the way out by the time 2005 hit. Halo 2 and COD 2 introduced the world to hyperlinear set pieces and regenerating health. Both Half-Life games would introduce players to unbroken narratives through vast and dying environments in the first-person perspective. These staples wouldn't just affect the FPS genre, but legacy devs as a whole. Unreal developers Epic Games would shift their sights to the third-person market with Microsoft's Gears of War, taking Unreal Tournament's trademark futuristic sandbox and sanding them down to a fully ballistic gore-fest centered around positioning and cover-hopping tech, while diluting item spawn knowledge down to only power weapons. While companies like Valve, Infinity Ward, and Microsoft would flourish from changes like this, companies like Monolith would continue to make games in the vein of classic shooters, but would struggle to keep up technologically, and so their games would suffer for it, with both first installments of the Fear and Condemned series being the only games to break the aforementioned curse. On the other side, id Software would produce one of the most technologically fascinating game engines at the time, id Tech 4. A revolutionary use of stencil shadows and raycasting meant that all of their games at the time would look oppressive while being able to finally set the slower pace they desired to set for their older games. There was just one big problem to this though, that being that the level designers for id jumped ship before id could publish a game with this engine. id did develop Doom 3, but outsourced the rest of their big three to Raven Software, who made Quake 4 and Wolfenstein with these tools. To say that the results of their endeavors were mixed would be underselling it quite a bit. Doom 3 had quite a few problems, but stayed true enough to its roots and to the franchise's original intentions that it would receive its flowers over time. Quake 4 and Wolfenstein almost didn't resemble their franchises at all. Quake 4 would be bogged down by a general disinterest in being a Quake game until the halfway mark. Wolfenstein opted for a hub-world approach to the gameplay, obviously inspired by Starbreeze's output at the time, but sadly its inclusion in Wolfenstein 2009 was messy and uninteresting. Ironically, after the disappointing reception of this game, Starbreeze alumni would get to keep the Wolfenstein franchise underneath the Bethesda and Machine Games banner. id Tech 4's in-house output was iffy, but id being id, they open-sourced the engine to little official pickup. Outside of modders who would get a kick out of making new experiences out of their favorite id Tech 4 games, not many developers outside of the normal id collaborator sphere would use the engine, except for one. That's where the story of Prey picks up. 3D Realms showcased the game in '98 as being the adventures of Talon Brave, a Cherokee man fighting for his life on the spaceship that would bend dimensions as we knew them. 3D Realms had already prototyped Prey's portal tech in a vacuum, but had trouble making that a full game, let alone a full playable reality, opting to put development on the game on ice until further notice. Wisconsin-based HumanHead Studios would swoop in and use these design philosophies in id's proprietary engine to develop the game we know today, while also diverging enough to fit into the current market. Come 2006, Prey is a success in the eyes of 3D Realms and 2K, but how did a non-legacy developer pull what is essentially the last breath of the classic shooter out of the gutter? The answer is that HumanHead Studios fostered a deep love for every era of the first-person shooter genre and wanted to see it grow in a direction different from where it was going. Prey would rely on the medkits and infinite magazine sizes of the past, but would take a considered approach to its settings, characters, and gameplay contexts that most classic shooters ignored. Let's take a look at the limited information that 3D Realms gave us of Talon Brave. Knowing how in-house 3D Realms operated, it's not hard to assume that this protagonist could have ended up being a deeply unfunny caricature of race like Shadow Warrior Classic's Lo Wang, voiced by a white guy directed to do an at most questionable and at worst annoying Chinese accent. HumanHead didn't thankfully overcorrect and make the new protagonist Damacy Tolodi a charisma void that is afraid to interact with his heritage meaningfully like Shadow Warrior 2013's Lo Wang, a precarious tightrope to balance indeed. I would say HumanHead passed this examination of culture better than most games of the early aughts would, being able to culturally consult Damacy's Cherokee actor, Michael Greyeyes. Late Lo Wang actor John Galt does still get his lick in as Anisi, but his performance isn't directed to poke fun at culture, but to be a voice alongside it. Damasi, or Tommy as he calls himself, is sort of ashamed of his culture, feelings probably picked up during his time in the American military. His girlfriend Jen keeps trying to convince him that life on the reservation wouldn't be all too bad if he just learned to accept himself, much to his own chagrin. That changes when a species of aliens comes ripping off the roof of Jen's bar, sucking them into their Dyson sphere, a nasty biological ship reserved for human process and alien survival. Tommy must use his wit and overcome his disdain for his heritage to overcome the alien species. Already a compelling setup for 2006, the game's intro is something so entrancing that it made me not want to put the game down until I completed it. The world interactivity from other 3D Realms games is present but at a much higher volume. Tommy can gamble at blackjack machines, and later these machines are repurposed as ammo repositories for the aliens, allowing Tommy to gain more ammo if he wins a hand of poker. The jukebox contains licensed music not limited to Heart and Judas Priest, allowing a player to create their own dive bar atmosphere. The choice gets overrun by the time the aliens arrives, as emergency broadcasts whine alongside Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper. Goosebumps take hold of your arm, as you know you're about to play something so thematically different than what you were used to. Mechanically, however, Prey sees itself taking the best gameplay tropes of the time and condensing them into a familiar package. Detractors and critics of Prey's gameplay loop lament the fact that Prey doesn't do a lot with its core sandbox to differentiate itself from other classic shooters. You still have grenade launchers, rifles, and energy weapons, just recontextualized with the Spear's biowarfare agenda. I should note this because I was one of these detractors growing up. When I played the game in early 2019 for the first time, I felt misled by praise for the game, saying that it was genuinely unique and that there was nothing like it at all when there happened to be 3 games that played quite like it. Doom 3, Quake 4, and Wolf 2009 were all fresh in my mind already, so feeling that this game was more of the same, I put it down. How wrong was I in this original assessment? Deeply. Prey does take the setups of games like Quake 4 and Doom 3 specifically. These games have you clambering through dark corridors with slower combat for the most part. Quake 4 broke up that monotony with interesting vehicle sections, something that Prey would also do. It predates Portal's dimension-tearing shenanigans, even being the first to establish the blue and orange color scheme that the Valve games Portals would use later. The weapons were direct analogs of classic shooter arsenals. Tommy's Spirit Bow was simply a railgun, and the Leech Gun came in plasma gun and cryo thrower flavors very early into the game. Mechanical originality isn't in Prey's core design tenets. It couldn't possibly be. Contextual innovation is, though, and it is the first thing that Prey wants to convey to the player by any means necessary. For Prey's development, it seems it was necessary to borrow from what was being shown of Doom 3 and Quake 4 specifically, as both games fumbled the ball in some of their goals when they released. While it's a good game, Doom 3 fails to be genuinely scary, just horror adjacent with annoying jump scares that diminish both replay value and the core designs of the monsters. If a demon can just be hidden behind a door ready to take a chunk of unavoidable damage in such a resource-sensitive game, it's going to be incredibly annoying to most of your player base. I've already spoken on Quake 4's reluctance to be a Quake game, but by God is the first half of the game dreadful. Constant turret sections, squad mechanics that are thematically incongruent to the rest of the series, and some of the most unengaging military jargon briefs that just don't belong in Quake. People remember Quake 4 for a different reason, though. Its effective use of body horror on the player at the halfway mark, where protagonist Matthew Kane is subjected to forced transformation into a member of the Strogg military. A process teased but not outright shown between Quake 2 and the first half of Quake 4. This Stroggification turns Kane into a super fast, bunny-hopping beast, well, as much as Quake 4's tight corridors would let him be. And the final half of the game is remembered fondly for it. It felt like Raven and id didn't understand exactly how to shift the gameplay of the 5th generation into the 7th generation. Series that prided themselves on being fast-paced gore fests were bogged down by an attempt to catch up with a changing market. Where Prey gains its strength is in the recontextualization of these elements. The body horror of Prey isn't the twist, it's the hook. The odd changes of reality aren't a mid-game change, but something that the game takes full advantage of. The reason Prey sticks out compared to its brothers is that Prey is uncompromising with the classic shooter formula, whereas games like Doom 3 were so scared of scale creep that they just threw in iconography from other games as an attempt to seem like they weren't behind the times. Hey, here's a totally not gravity gun, haha. Prey is the FPS bread and butter mechanically, so it allows HumanHead to change the context of everything around it. Prey's weapons are sometimes bile-spewing organic machines that look like they hurt to wield, acid dripping from the scatter gun and a hook-like attachment strapping itself to your eye to track your sniper rifle's killing blow. Alien bugs roam the floor of the sphere, allowing Tommy to crack a leg off and throw them as a grenade, and mass-produced weaponized versions of these buggers are unveiled at the tail end of the game, allowing for a full rocket assault or a temporary deployable shield. Sometimes they are mostly mechanical beasts and feats of machinery, such as being able to swap between the leech guns for firing modes at unique ammo stations. You can't just use the plasma gun, lightning gun, cryo thrower, or death laser at the same time. Choices and concessions must be made to use the leech gun properly. My point is that if your arsenal has me look at a little dude in the ground and I say, "Ooh, gimme," then you're doing something right. The enemy variety is rather interesting too. It plays by the same rules as the weapons themselves, but only for a little bit. You have your soldier type enemies, your dog types, and your mega brutes. But then the game gets a little weird with it. Mutants that look like they should be lumbering towers of meat spin like ballerinas around Tommy, knocking him away from them. Floating gas bags, seemingly unrelated to the main aliens, float around the external of the sphere. One of the most endearingly annoying enemy types is a rocket launcher mecha quadrupedal that spams bug rockets at you. But should you return the favor, he shields up with the rocket launcher alternate fire. While the AI can be a little bit goofy sometimes, it can still pull some really interesting moves. Should both you and an enemy be low on health, a mad dash for any healing spores on the ground is triggered, as enemies can pick them up too. I've never seen anything like this before, even further proving my point that Prey's uniqueness relies on that mechanical familiarity to make moments that just trip players the hell up. Quake 4's superhuman aspects are rewound into Tommy's heritage. Shortly after arriving at the sphere, Anisi is devoured by a harvesting machine and Tommy follows him into the afterlife after falling to his death. Anisi shows Tommy his Spirit Walk, an ability that allows Tommy to shed his ethereal form and distract enemies or solve puzzles. Spirit Walk also gives Tommy access to a limited-use one-hit kill bow. Tommy even gets access to his childhood pet, Talon, a hawk that can turn from a friendly guide to a deadly ally. Run out of energy, and Tommy just can't use spirit form until he kills an enemy. Should the enemy get a drop on Tommy, he will just die. But should Tommy have a little bit of spirit in him, he gets teleported to an arena where he must combat the Dishonored dead to get back to his body. This is another point of contention for Prey's gameplay loop, as Tommy never dies if you play your cards right. And with Prey's tight-knit level flow, you're never short of enemies to kill. I never felt like this took away from Prey's experience or challenge. It added so much more than I originally could have thought of. Most classic shooters rely on a quick save system to get you back in the fight. Regarding that a player has made a grave mistake, just smack F5 and then smack F9 if you don't feel comfortable with where you're at right now, or if your character can't feel anything at all. Eating shit is a universal problem that every player must eventually face, so why not make the process less frustrating and cheesy? The Spirit Trial feels so playful with the idea of quick saves, sort of making them a canon event in the mechanical storytelling of Prey, which is a playfulness I don't see in most classic shooters, even with the boomer shooter revival of the late 2010s. This was a tough effort to balance, but HumanHead once again shows their love for the genre with a feature like this. It also helps that later sections in the game, as in classic shooter fashion, feel rather cheap and unavoidable for a first-time player. The pinnacle of Prey's playfulness comes within its level design, and I have still yet to find a classic shooter that comes close to matching Prey's grandiosity and detail. Outside of boom shoot affairs like Dusk, of course. Prey takes this opportunity to take a look at combat in every direction. Enemies will spawn upside down normally, taking shots at Tommy as he moves on the ground. Aerial enemies will not care that Tommy is taking a skywalk, so a quick dismount would be advised. Levels are the most interesting they've ever been in id Tech 4, and that's not just limited to the combat arenas. Levels are the life force of Prey's slower moments instead of cutscenes. One thing Prey understands that other id Tech 4 games couldn't get right is proper pacing. Prey is a game that can be beaten in 6 hours, like its brethren, but it wants you to play by its timing and will go out of its way to make sure that's respected. There's minimal backtracking because of this. Instead, HumanHead opts to fill environments with light puzzles to get the brain working when there isn't any shooting. My favorite one is the cube puzzle, or anything involving gravity. Shooting wall panels allows Tommy to manipulate a tracer block that fills in the gaps between an incomplete cube he was teleported into. One of my other favorite moments in the game combines puzzle, action, and odd charm into one room. The defining moment of Prey. You plop into a hallway and are stopped by a growth in the wall. With a keen eye, you spot a gravity panel pulling you into the left wall. You climb onto the other side of the growth and hit another panel, all while the opening riffs of Barracuda play and Ann Wilson sings her heart out. "Shut it off," one of the aliens groans, but they fumble with the buttons until they are blaring "You've Got Another Thing Coming" by Judas Priest. You can take pot shots from the ulcer in the wall, or you can jump down as aliens flood in from portals. It's blood pumping in a way that most other set pieces of the time weren't. In terms of other influences here, there seems to be a big shock influence on this game too, down to the wrench that Tommy wields. The other big type of level presented in this game are the space shuttle sections, which seem to be a much more palpable take on the cyberspace sections from the original System Shock. Tommy can move items and send enemies falling to a demise with the tractor beam, or hold them in place as you blast them with rockets. These sections tend to be presented with even more vastness than the already towering on-foot levels, flying through travel tunnels only to be met with moons to land on and vents to purge. The combined arms gameplay here is incredibly fluid and done masterfully. I alluded earlier that Prey's gameplay loop can be cheap sometimes, and it is something that I deeply lament. The rest of the game goes so far out of its way to make sure that the player is always experiencing wonder over frustration, but it's so odd when later arenas just have droves of enemies rush you for what seems like an eternity rather than the tight, puzzling design of the other two-thirds of the game. My least favorite encounter types in the game are when the game spams flying enemies around you with little to no ammo around or in your reserves. Looping constantly between the Spirit Trial and the Sphere can be grating when you are being fucked sideways by cluster bombs. Prey's charm is infectious from top to bottom, and in the middle lies Tommy's characterization and the lives of the people around him. Or lack of lives now. Tommy is just as much of an active observer as the player, and often my reactions would sync up with his. He's befuddled, as am I. He's disgusted, as am I. He is shocked time and time again by the many scenes of decadence that the Sphere allows for. Again, as am I. School buses infested by spirits that take the lives of children and turn them into poltergeists would fuck me up too, Demasi. One of my favorite Tommy moments is during the fight with this game's Cyber Demon analog. While the encounter itself does dull down to shoot it before it dies, it does have the coolest classic shooter boss fight moment I think I've ever experienced. Distracting the beast with spirit time allows Tommy to run into an air vent. Eventually, after regaining focus on Tommy, the beast will stick its arm in the shaft, letting Tommy rip his arm off with a tap at the panel. He shouts expletives at the monster, and I follow suit. Yeah, Tommy, let's see how those fuckers like it. Tommy's writing isn't always that charming, though. I know Whedonistic writing wasn't exactly the norm in 2006, but this game's usage of it is still tiring and out of place. Take the first example of the Spirit Children. Tommy walks into a room where the children are singing Ring Around the Rosie in a tired and cliche manner. Tommy's first instinct is to go, "This is creeping me out," followed by a, "This cannot be good." At which point I just expected him to go, She's right behind me, isn't she?" Prey doesn't take itself deadly seriously. It has its moments of grave bleakness, but it's prone to being jokey, which is why moments like these are disorienting to me because they come across as cheap and a waste of time. Bending the knee to tired cliches isn't Prey's MO normally. There are other moments that kind of diminish Tommy as a character too, such as his reluctance to accept his spirituality, despite aliens descending on Earth. Despite him being placed in the afterlife for a brief time, he's still calling Cherokee belief superstition. Despite having such an advanced protagonist and background in gaming in 2006, Prey can't help but be brought down by some of the most 2006-ass writing still. Prey's use of the Cherokee is still great for such an old game. Keep in mind, this was released around a time when developers didn't have too much of a problem with depicting natives as the bad guys you need to mow down. It's a very positive, but in a more machismo early aughts way. Nothing wrong with that at all, because the simple message like, respect your heritage, shit's badass, is a theme that Prey does deserve to tote on its shoulders. In terms of side characters, Anisi is still a very good character to keep around. He's Tommy's anchored to his heritage and his guiding voice. I feel a game without him would feel so much more empty. Jen, to me, is completely uninteresting. She's used as a damsel in distress, and most of her role is just screaming into the player's ear as she's dangled over our heads. The game will normally go out of its way to make Tommy relatively incompetent in protecting her after he initially frees her with the help of a human tribe in the Sphere. The one twist with her is that she is turned into a violent creature from the waist down after her second capture, and while her design and the consequences of this fight are pretty good, the fight itself is so unfun that HumanHead actively had to fill the room with respawning ammo to make this a fair fight. Jen does die, and while it isn't a twist, it is still shocking to see a fight with the damsel herself. It's one of the moments of foraging that doesn't come across as completely trite to me, as it flips the concept of the moment on the player. The majority of the game has Tommy chasing the keeper of the Sphere, while it seemingly taunts him as he moves from station to station, all while culminating in a climax that fully contextualizes the hell that Tommy has stumbled upon. The Keeper isn't who was taunting Tommy, which was hinted at earlier in the game, but instead he does take a moment to tell Tommy that Earth is being used as the vessel for food processing for the aliens. The aliens seeded Earth long ago and are now coming back to reap the crops they've cultivated, and to use the inedible as minerals or slaves. We see this with enemies like the drones, those being former gas bag aliens forced to serve the sphere. Humans can be inducted into slavery too, and the sphere has its own natural cleanup system with the fodder enemies. Turning what is our natural resources into usable technology is something humanity does do daily. Using material from animals, both predator and prey, to manufacture our way of life isn't unheard of either. So subjecting humanity into this demise is genuinely terrifying. Turning the organic into the artificial is hell indeed. Turning humanity into cattle isn't unheard of for monster media, but I don't think it's been depicted in mainstream gaming as viscerally as it has been here. Nonetheless, Tommy rejects that fate, rejoices in his heritage, and blasts away at the Keeper and every boss in this game, only for him to realize that he isn't the only Keeper on the station, calling for Tommy to take on an endurance fight against a majority of the species. When presented with the end of the line, the woman on the other end of the spectral link from Tommy calls upon him to convene with her, even going so far as to wipe the dormant Keepers off of the ship to gain what trust she can from Tommy. Conversing with her reveals that she was once in the position that Tommy was, a lone fighter trudging through the sphere only to be met with a choice: become the apex predator and find a world to feast on, in the hopes that another warrior would best her. Tommy rejects the cycle, killing her and sending the sphere into the sun, congratulated by Anisi and greeted with an end credit scene where a not-so-quite Kings of Leon song plays. Tommy finds himself back at the bar cooling down. The leader of the human group calls upon Tommy to reach out to the stars to help another group of people far across the cosmos. Prey will continue, the screen says. Except it didn't. Try as HumanHead wanted to, external factors got in the way of both of their attempts at a second game. HumanHead sought out Bethesda as a publisher around the time of its development, where they assisted with some of Bethesda's shooters. Prey was revealed in 2011 and cancelled shortly after, and what happened to HumanHead in the following years is also quite bizarre, being ripped from their current projects to be bought out by Bethesda and dissolved and reformed into Roundhouse Studios. Arcane Studios would take the Prey name and use it for their own game, and while I don't mind that at all, I did want to mention it here instead of in the next big video I have cooking up. However, I do find it really concerning that both developers of a video game named Prey were forced to work on the same game that shuttered both of their studios. Thanks, Bethesda. On all accounts, Prey is a marvelous game that holds up even today, although because of a technical fuck-up with the publishing rights to the game isn't purchasable by official means anymore on PC. It's only purchasable from secondhand providers. You can acquire a digital copy for the Xbox One and play that through the backwards compatibility program on later Xboxes. The game is so old that it can run on a potato, so I urge everyone with a working laptop to pick this game up. I hope that I can inspire an urge to preserve this game safely. If a preservation project is already out there, I hope someone can find a link to that archive and share it with the world. I hope more people get to experience this game not at the behest of corporate incompetence. Anyways, I'm gonna link a photo collage archive of Prey in the description so you can imagine yourself having fun, and hopefully it inspires you to play the game. If you want to download the collage itself with little to no headache, click on the preyrip.zip link and download it into your preferred folder. If you're also having trouble with the resolution appearing correctly, just go into the PC Gaming Wiki for Prey, also linking that, and look into the resolution tab to find a solution to this problem. Credit for Livid Bunny for putting this together. Thank you deeply for watching.
I love you.
Emotional, damn it!
Fuck you!
By the way, if you want my review for Redfall, here it is. Do not play it.